This is a 20 to 30-minute presentation on digital authentication of engineering documents. This presentation, as Jasmine mentioned, will be followed by a panel discussion and live Q&A. So the purpose really of this presentation is for all the attendees to get acquainted with the terms and terminologies of digital signatures, electronic signatures, document reliability. So it kind of paints the landscape, and hopefully this short presentation will inspire some questions from the group. So without further ado, today's agenda. So we're just going to touch point on who is Notarius, just to put who we are in context, the current context, the economic context, the legal requirements and document reliability. So what to look for, what are the key ingredients for legal document reliability, different types of electronic signatures. So we'll be introduced to what's out there, what's available for PEng. We'll speak of the PEO requirements, so Professional Engineers of Ontario's requirements. So they're in the process of modernizing their use of seal for electronic document practice and guidelines, why those requirements are there, and what have we seen impact on the practice. So we are working with all the provincial and territorial engineering associations. So we'll see what have been the impact for both the engineers, but also the business that are engaged in the engineering consulting world. So let's start with who we are. So we've got 25 years of experience. So we're celebrating this year our 25th anniversary in providing trusted digital signatures to professionals, to government, and to organizations and systems. So we work with people, we work with organizations as well. It could be government or private companies. And we also have applications where we can be embedded into information systems. So to allow electronic and digital signature of transactions. So we enable the production and issuance of legally reliable electronic documents that can be open, read, and authenticated over decades. This piece is pretty important, especially for the engineering community. A lot of time infrastructure works, plans, drawings, the infrastructure that they build or create have long lifespan. Certifications and recognitions, we have evolved over the last 25 years. We were certified ISO 9001, which is management. We were the first certificate authority in North America to be recognized to be certified ISO 27001. I like to say trust is not a technology. Trust is about how you manage technology. So this security standard is one of the best one to achieve. We're also an Adobe approved trust list member. We're also EIDAS, which is European standards for advanced electronic signatures. As I mentioned, we're recognized by multiple government entities, federal, provincial, land title registries. We're a strong advocate of the PDFA ISO standard. Again, this is an archive standard. So when we say that the documents can be open for decades to come, that is a key standard. We are owned by the Board of Notaries of Quebec. So just as a background, we're born out of a legal requirement for the Quebec Land Title Registry to make sure that notaries members in good standing are submitting land title registration to the Quebec Land Title Registry. And at the other end, the Quebec Land Title Registry can be sure that the documents that are submitted electronically to them have been digitally signed by members in good standing and are tamper proof. We are also a member of the DAC, the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. So we like to sit where the standards are put together to make sure that we abide by them. Best practices. Today, we work with 47 different regulators, and that's growing. We hope to be able to have 50 by the end of this year on board with us and working together. We work in 16 different professional fields, so landscape architects, engineers, architects, land surveyors, lawyers. So any profession that requires high standards of electronic document authentication, we try to work with and partner with. So with that being said, and who we are and our background, what's the changing business landscape? So even before COVID hit, cloud adoption was growing rapidly. And the reason for that is we want to work from anywhere, at any time, on any device, and also be able to consume our information services as a service. So, that's where the cloud comes in. We're moving also into an application age, or an application-based economy. So there's an application for pretty much everything our businesses can do. There's accounting software, supply chain management software, human resource management software, and we can typically have those downloaded as an app on an iPhone, tablets, Androids, or computers. So this is more and more becoming the way that we engage with customers and suppliers. Engineering companies are doing their project management via applications as well. So basically today, our smartphones have basically beaten the toothbrush as the first thing we pick up in the morning and the last thing we drop off at night before going to bed. And obviously what we've seen is that COVID-19 has drastically accelerated the digital transformation, the reality of work from home, and that really hit the engineering community, not having access to the corporate plotters and printing devices and so on and so forth, made so that we needed to find a way to be able to digitally authenticate engineering documents, drawings, plans, designs remotely from home. So with that reality, what is the legal context? I'm not a jurist, so I'm just going to paint the high-level requirements here, or what we're seeing, or the commonalities, but the key ingredients and what to look for. So I broke it down into 3 levels. So in Canada, in the late 1990s, Canada recommended that we adopt the United Nations and Commerce and International Trade Law that was put together, and recommended that the provinces adopt the same type of framework. So there's different levels of laws. One that applies at the international level, the PIPEDA applies for federal agencies, and there's also every province has adopted their own flavors. But basically, you can take a look here and you'll see that there's 2 key things that pop up. Number one is when we're talking about electronic signatures, am I able to validate the identity of the signer? So do I know who's signing? And the next piece is, does that technology or process protect the data integrity of the transaction or the electronic document? So we're seeing it with the E-commerce Act in Ontario. Is the electronic signature reliable for the purpose of identifying the person? Is there a reliable assurance as to the integrity of the information? And is the association of the electronic signature with the record reliable as well? And we'll look at the different breeds or options that you can have on the market. And when we say varying level of reliability, that depends on the context or the purpose for which I'm signing, right? So if an electronic signature is an electronic consent, so I agree or I disagree to something electronically. So there's a lot of ways I can do that, right? In an email, I can agree to have a business lunch with someone in the audience today. There's not a lot of legal implication with agreeing to that. So an email is probably fine for the purpose. But if you're applying or putting your name onto a design, a drawing on a $10 million project, the legal implication of that are not the same as I agree to the cookies, or I agree to the terms and condition of the software I just downloaded on my iPhone, or I agree to have this lunch with you tomorrow. So the end goal for engineers is really document reliability, especially when we're talking about infrastructure projects and putting your name on the spot and reputation on the spot. So as we saw in the legal requirements, there are a couple of key ingredients. 2 key ingredients are know who's signing and have a high level of data integrity. So can I make my document tamper-proof? So one plus the other will equal, in our term, document authenticity. So I'm able to know that my colleague, Virginia Wilson, signed that record, and I'm able to trust that, and also that the document is made tamper-proof. Well, at that point, I have a highly reliable document. The last piece is important, especially again in the engineering world, because infrastructure have long lifespans. So you want to make sure that you're able to, whatever documents that you digitally sign today, you're able to open it and still be able to validate the data integrity and the identity of the signer for years or decades to come, even if the provider would no longer exist. So even if Notarius would be out of business, we still have legal obligation that we'll have to maintain some services where anything that was digitally signed in the past will be able to be validated for years to come. And for the readability, that's where the PDF-A archive standard comes in. We tend to associate PDF with Adobe. Really, PDF is portable document format. It's an open source format. There's a lot of PDF library editors available out there. And since it's become pretty much a standard, the international community got together and adopted an ISO standard for archive. And if our tools will allow you to create PDF-A compliant, and that will mean that Adobe Reader version 25 in a couple of decades from now will be able to open and read those documents that you digitally signed years ago. So data is know who's signing, data integrity, and be able to open and read those documents and validate the data integrity for years to come. That's where we have uncompromised reliability. So let's look at the different spectrum of electronic signatures. So as I mentioned, a signature, one of the legal definition is a permanent mark bonded to a static document that is traceable, exclusive to, and personal to an individual. It constitutes evidence of implicit or explicit intent, so agreeing or disagreeing. So there's many ways in which we can agree or disagree to something in the electronic format. Any form of electronic consent is an electronic signature. Again, if you're downloading software on your iPhone, you always have a term and conditions, you click I accept, that's a form of electronic signature, it's a consent. If I'm agreeing to something by email, it's a form of consent. If I'm agreeing to the cookies of the website I'm visiting, same thing. So depending on what we're authenticating, we want to have more or less reliability. Digital signature is one that's a specific breed of electronic signature, and it's based on public key infrastructure. It's an electronic signature in which reliability characteristics have been reinforced with asymmetric key encryption. I'm not going to get technical with you today, but it's based on asymmetric key encryption. The way that works, pretty simple. It's the same way that a key and a lock works together. So there's one encryption key and there's one decryption key, same as the key and the lock. In a public key infrastructure, you have two important players. One is the certificate authority. So that's an organization that operates one or several public key infrastructure. And there's a registration authority. This is who you're able to register to the service. In our example here, when we work with PEO, Notarius is the certificate authority. So we provide the software, the infrastructure, the updates, everything that's needed to operate a public key infrastructure. But the only way a PEO member can register or get a digital signature from Notarius is through PEO. So go to notarius.com/PEO. You'll be able to fill in the subscription form. You'll get your identity verified via live video conferencing. You'll need to show valid pieces of ID. And once we're sure that you are who you claim to be, we will send your requests on to PEO staff. They will look at the membership database and confirm that, yeah, you're a member in good standing, and therefore we'll be able to publish your professional title, designation, and your member number into the digital signature certificate. So there's varying levels of reliability. If we start from left to right, you can copy and paste the image of your signature or seal. We've all done that. Copying and pasting images onto an electronic document does little if nothing to protect the data integrity of that file. I can tamper with that document and the image will remain on that document. And anyone can copy and paste the image of your seal and signature. Anything that shows up on screen, control, print screen, copy, paste, and I can apply your signature and stamp onto something else you've never seen before and never therefore authenticated. So that's pretty unreliable. Next level, email signature. We all have signatures in our email. A bit more reliability. There's some metadata around email. I can have an end user license. It'll tell me which server, the IP addresses, the dates at which the email was sent, received, and so on and so forth. But there's not a lot of data integrity, and sometimes we can argue about was I able to forge or tamper with that metadata to claim that the email didn't come from you or someone else. Then at the next level, we have self-issued digital certificate. In this case, asymmetric key encryption, data integrity is high, but since it's self-issued, I can claim to be whomever I want. So if I want to claim to be Jasmine, I can self-issue myself a digital signature certificate claiming to be Jasmine, and therefore people will think that I'm not that I'm someone else. There's a lot of e-signature platforms out there. I put the name of a couple of ones here, eSign Live, DocuSign, HelloSign, and even our own Consigno Cloud, which is a cloud-based e-signature platform. Typically speaking, they do a fairly good job at protecting data integrity of records as long as the records are in the platform. A lot of times when the records leave the platform, they become unprotected PDF documents. And with regards to the reliability of the data, of the identity of the signer, well, in some cases, they might do a good job. In some cases, it might be poor, right? I could be Charles at google.com, and I can claim to be someone else, and no one's checking on my credentials. So having a strong ID verification process in place is key. Verified.me is one commercial one that the banks have put together. So if I'm the Bank of Montreal and I want to trust a customer from Bank of Toronto Dominion to do some transaction, there's a verified.me ID, digital ID, if you'd like, and we can leverage those as well. And the highest level we have on the market is of trust is what we call our Certifio digital signature certificate. This is the one we provide to PEO members. This is one credential where we vet your ID in person via live video conference, and the professional association will confirm and maintain the link to the professional title designation. In other words, if a member that has a digital certificate issued by Notarius is suspended or barred from the association has full control over the issuance and revocation of that credential, therefore minimizing the chances of illegal practice digitally. So if we take a look again at the e-signature spectrum from left to right, we have the wedding, digital signature, stamp images. We saw that this does not protect the integrity of a file on which it is copied and pasted to. It's a low level of identity. How can I trust that you were the person that copied and pasted? Therefore, the authenticity is very low. E-signature platform, they typically do, again, a very good job at data integrity. And they might do a good or maybe not a good job at vetting the idea of the users in the platform. So therefore, the authenticity can be more or less reliable. Self-issued digital signature certificates, they do a great job at protecting document integrity, but since it's self-issued, I cannot vet. I cannot trust who's behind this. Is it really me, or am I pretending to be someone else, or am I pretending to be myself but engineer and doing illegal practice? So these are also all questions. With regards to the PEO's digital signature certificate, again, the integrity of the file is protected, the identity of the signer is validated, and the professional title is verified and maintained by the professional association. So who is using professional digital signatures in Ontario? So we saw across Canada, we work with about 47 professional different associations. These are the ones we work with in Ontario. So professional engineers, Ontario's Association of Architects, Ontario Landscape Architects. We are hoping, crossing our fingers, that we'll announce maybe two new partnerships in Ontario by the end of the year or over the course of the next couple of months. So let's take a look here and look at the requirements. So if you take a look, I've got the reference link here. So if you go on PEO, the 2019 Use of Professional Engineers Seal requirements, 7.3, use and control of electronic documents. Professional engineers responsible for sealing electronic must ensure that their organization adopt a method of creating, archiving, and distributing electronic format that control and protect the electronic facsimile of the seal. So engineers in Ontario are required to protect the image of their seal that's applied to an electronic document, ensure document integrity, and allow verification of the identity of the practitioner. That's a full circle to the legal requirement we discussed a bit earlier. Know who's signing and make sure you have data integrity. That's the effective way to protect your electronic facsimile of your seal and signature applied to electronic document. And another reference here, taken off PEO's website, license holders, so PEO did recognize that in 2020, 2019, and moving forward, we're working more and more in a digital world. So producing digital documents or electronic documents, we're no longer or less and less printing rolls of paper, but we're still required to have an original. And that's where the legal requirements came in earlier on. So with PEO, you can now accomplish this task with Certifio, which is the product I mentioned for professional, and the Professional Engineer Ontario has selected Notarius to provide digital signature to license holders. So these are PEO's requirement. You could opt for another technology than Notarius according to PEO, but you just need to make sure you cover all the bases: data integrity, identity of the signer. So you need to do your homework with regards to having a platform that does that. However, the digital signature issued by PEO does confirm the professional title designation since it's issued by the regulator. So why those requirements? Why are a professional association whose mission is protecting the public doing this or having those requirements for electronic document authentication? One is legal requirements, and the other one is because forged documents are real. So there are cases, there's one which is documented on the OSPE website, where you're seeing contractors copying and pasting engineers' seal and stamp onto electronic documents so that they can get their permit to build, so their license to build. We're also seeing other examples where an engineer was suspended or had his license to practice revoked. So he surrendered his physical seal. That's the second article. But he had an image, a scanned image of a seal that he kept on using for illegal practice. And it was actually a building official who called the bluff and wasn't sure that the member was still registered. So he called PEO, and PEO said, no, he's no longer has the professional title designation. He should no longer practice engineering. So having a professional digital signature certificate that can be validated by the public is also a key to the success of this. So PEO's professional digital signature, the characteristic, it confirms a person's identity. We will vet your ID. It protects the document's integrity. It confirms that the professional is a member in good standing. The issuance and revocation is under the control of the regulator, whereas the use is under the control of the professional. You need a digital signature certificate. That's like your bank card. And you need to know the password to use it. That's like your PIN number. If I don't have both, I cannot do this on your behalf. It has to be also easily and freely verifiable by the public and the relying party. If I'm having a proprietary system that nobody can double check, that can rely on, I'm part there, I'm halfway there. And we touched base on PDFA a bit earlier on. So what impacts have we seen? And this is the last section before we go into the panel discussions. And this is taking off some of the feedback we get in our annual surveys. So let's pull back before we look into that. The big picture is really, there's the issuer, which is the Professional Engineers of Ontario's regulator. They protect the public. They have authority over a competency profile. They have control over the issuance and use of not only the digital signature, but also the wet stamp. If you're suspended or barred, you are required to return that and stop using it. And they are also responsible for enforcing regulatory framework. So making sure that the electronic documents meet the highest levels of standard. For engineers, it's keeping pace with technology and clients' needs. Clients are no longer expecting or looking to receive rolls of paper, because typically speaking, the first thing they do with that is they scan it. So they want to do away with it. They want to go digital. And for third parties, that could be local government, municipalities, provincial government, Ontario Ministry of Transportation, or federal government. They want to be able to make sure that whatever they receive, they can validate, make sure that the document is tamper-proof and has been digitally signed by a professional, a registered professional engineers. So that's the big picture. So the impact for the professionals, for the engineers, what we've seen is 50% use the digital signature at least once a week, 10% of our users at least once every day, 40% sign more than a dozen documents per month. The satisfaction rate that we have for products and services is at 97%, and the renewal rate is at 92%. Recently, the most recent stats we have is 94%. So the people that do the transition usually stick with it, and most non-renewals are people that actually retire. There's cost to paper, there's cost to digital, and really what you need to do is make sure that if you're not signing on a high volume of documents, you might want to stick to paper. But in the engineering world, people that are working on engineering project and infrastructure, they tend to use their seal on a lot of documents. And the cost of paper just becomes way more expensive than going digital. The key benefits for engineers is security and integrity of the documents is the number one reason they appreciate our service. Better environmental practice than paper. So it avoids printing and also couriering of the documents. So by trucks and couriers. Increased productivity, 86%, and cost reduction, 76% of our users say is way less expensive than paper. For businesses, it was really an enabler of digital transformation, digital document lifecycle management. Business continuity is a big thing as well. If your paper vault archive burns, you've lost it. If your computer system crashes, you typically have a backup or a copy. Time savings and money savings. And for the relying parties, really, it allowed them to do automation of document management processes. Rather than receiving rolls of paper and scanning those, it allows them to go into a full digital document management workflow. Makes it easier, security with document reliability. I can actually check the credentials of the signer and make sure that they're members in good standing, and they're not doing illegal practice, and the data integrity of the files are protected. So that covers the landscape of what we wanted to touch points. So high level as to different sort of electronic documents, legal reliability requirements as well, PEO requirements that aligns with the legal requirements. So at this point, I'd like to do is quickly introduce our moderator today, Virginia Wilson. She's Director of Marketing at Notarius. She has over 15 years of marketing and communication experience. She joined Notarius in November, so she'll be celebrating her first anniversary at Notarius, and she works closely with myself, but every business unit in Notarius to support Canadian Association partners, as well as our end users, yourselves, professional engineers of Ontario. So Virginia, the floor is yours, and I'll stop sharing that's my screen for now.
Great. So hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you, Charles. So I'm very, very happy to be able to present today's panelists. We're going to begin with a series of questions. However, we do welcome all attendees. Please submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them as quickly as possible. So our first panelist is Chelsea Howard. She is a director at BMS Canada Risk Management Services and has more than a decade of experience in the insurance industry. So BMS Canada is OSFI's dedicated liability insurance broker and works with thousands of engineers throughout Ontario and Canada. Chelsea is a certified risk manager and fellow chartered insurance professional. The primary focus of her career has been on the development and servicing of professionals and commercial general liability insurance programs for various professionals. Chelsea has a strong technical background in liability insurance products and is current in the trends occurring in the insurance industry. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you, Virginia, and good afternoon, everyone.
Next, we have Harp Cook. Harp practices litigation with an emphasis on construction law, property law, professional liability, and insurance law. Harp regularly deals with construction liens, trust claims, delay claims, contamination and environmental claims, liability claims against various professionals, discipline hearings, commercial and residential real estate disputes, and property damage. Harp graduated from McMaster University with an honors Bachelor of Commerce. He obtained his law degree from the University of Victoria, British Columbia. Welcome, Harp.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you for having me.
And finally, we have our presenter who will be staying on with us, Charles Trombley. As mentioned earlier, Charles has worked for over 25 years in information technology and cybersecurity and has more than a dozen years of service with Notarius. He has seen the development of technologies and standards for document reliability and electronic transactions. He passionately contributes to the dematerialization of documents and transactions, business modernization, as well as digital transformation. So once again, welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you.
So we're going to begin with our first question that has been on a lot of people's minds. So are electronic seals legally accepted in Canada? Would somebody like to begin with that question or answering that question?
I can take that one.
Great.
And I think Charles pretty much answered the question, but I'll give you a bit of a summary. So when we look at it from a federal perspective, you have PIPEDA, which Charles mentioned, the Professional Information Protection Electronic Document Act, that allows electronic signatures, electronic seals, and by reference, digital signatures. And then provincially, we have the Electronic Commerce Act, which allows it. And then we also have a system of law that we call the common law, which is the law of the courts, which I normally use a lot, even more than legislation. And I would say in the early 2000s, since the early 2000s, electronic signatures of all sorts have been recognized as an enforceable mechanism, which is significant. And then probably of most importance, which Charles went over, the PEO. The PEO released, I believe, its first guideline to using seals in 2005. I think that guideline is being amended or has been amended in 2021. I've seen a version that I think it was out for consultation, but it may have already been put in. But even in 2005, they recognized electronic signatures as being something that could be used as long as you met the criteria that I think Charles described in his presentation. And then another very significant development is as of January 2021, the PEO has now the Professional Engineer Ontario digital signature, which is in collaboration with Notarius. So simple answer, yes, legally accepted.
Great. Thank you for that, Harp. We're going to go to another question that has obviously popped up. Does the use of electronic seals reduce or increase my liability?
I can take that one.
Great.
So I would say that it's a little bit of both. It certainly reduces your liability if you have a seal that is authenticated, trackable, and verifiable. If there's any discrepancies between a design and construction, it's easy to go back to the document and see how, when, and where the modifications took place within a design. Some of the insurance companies that we work with have also stated that it can be used as evidence in the event that there is an accusation against an engineering firm. So if that could be used to prove that you either made a modification to a design and when, or if there was a modification that took place without the use of the seal. So those would be some ways that it reduces your liability. Ways that it increases, essentially just by having a greater cyber exposure. So you are more vulnerable to cybercrime if you are using online platforms or digital seals or cloud-based data storage. And it also is a greater exposure if you're using a seal that isn't authenticated or protected.
Great. And would anybody like to add anything to that for the liability portion?
I can give a bit of my perspective.
Okay,
Again,
great. Thank you, Harp.
I think Chelsea wonderfully put out the cyber concerns, and now with the document age where more and more information is being stored on your system and it's more privileged information, you always have that concern. But then in my practice, I deal with defending engineers a lot. So from that liability perspective of when I'm defending an engineer, the two major concerns that always come up are usually when there's a design issue, negligence in that regard, or when there's a review issue. So the review of whatever design it is an issue. So from that perspective, and again, I've been defending engineers for coming on 10 years. The seal electronic signature has little to no effect, right? I think, we got to remind ourselves what the seal is. The seal is to identify the work is prepared by an engineer, or that it's under the supervision of the engineer. It's an assurance to the recipient saying, hey, look, an engineer dealt with this document, that there's some security in that. What the seal doesn't do is tie any acceptability or accuracy to the work, right? So court, when they assign liability, when there's an issue with a deficient design, they're not looking at the seal, they're looking at the document and the facts. And is that design deficient? So whether there's a seal there or not a seal there, if there's a document that somebody relied on and it was negligent, there would be liability. If we look at, from the perspective of a seal being stolen and put on a document, and let's say that document is negligent, as long as we can show that document may have my seal, but I never put it on, I never intended it to be there, there would be no liability.
Great. That's very insightful. Thank you, Harp. I think there's a good follow-up question to that, actually. So do you see then digital signatures as a tool to end illegal practice?
Okay, so that's a question that me and Charles actually spoke about a little bit in a phone call, and I think it's a step in the right direction. I think the one key component you're going to need is if you have the digital signature out there. So you'd have the digital signature, and then you'd have an electronic seal, and that would be substantiating your document, but you also need it from the recipient end. So let's say you're putting in a design to a municipality. From the recipient's perspective, that municipality needs to know how to reference check that. They need to take the time and energy to do it. So once I think getting all the stakeholders on board and there's a consistency of process, I think it's going to do a lot to end the illegal practice. But at the same time, which is something that's a bit out of my wheelhouse, there's always a risk because this is an electronic medium with cyber attacks. with hacking of information, of a digital signature being stolen, right? It seems that more sophisticated that we get in our technology, the more sophisticated some of these criminals are getting. But I would add that, you know, in a lot of the cases that I've seen where seals, you know, where seals are misappropriately being used, or documents are used, you know, on other projects they weren't intended for, generally on the lower scale. So they're not the big infrastructure projects, they're the home builds. So I question how much work, you know, a small home builder, a small, whatever it is, whoever wants to steal this information is actually going to do to hack this type of information. Because I don't think it's easy, right? Maybe at the government level, but probably not at this level. The other thing I can say is that, so in the legal world, we have this system called the tear review system, e-registration, which if you are a lawyer that does property closings, you use this system to do these closings. And the system is very similar to what's implemented here. And a concern, and that system has been in place for a number of years. And what's gone on is lawyers with busy practices have sometimes enabled their staff, their non-licensed, their assistants, their clerks to use this information. And there's been incidents there. So, you know, as this becomes more common practice, and engineers, obviously senior engineers are very busy, that's always going to be a concern that, you know, the signature is being shared, the capabilities are being shared with people who shouldn't have that authorization.
Great. Thank you so much for that insight once again, Harp. We did get a question online, two actually, so I'm going to try to merge these questions together. So PO requirements mentioned that digital signatures allow verification of the identity of practitioners originating the document. The question is on how can a third party or the public in general validate digital signatures and authenticate the seal under the Notarius program. So it's a blended question, but that covers the gist of it.
Yeah.
Any takers on this one?
I'll take up this one, Virginia. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Charles.
Thank you for this very good question. So yeah, so that's an interesting requirement that in out of the 47 professional association, right, there's different level of requirement, but that one is pretty unique. Whereas is how can I vet the identities? This is where really process kicks in, right? Because most users in platforms, they have their identity vet by providing an email address and a password. So I can claim to be Jasmine, so jwada at ospe.on.ca. I've got her email address. I can go into an application and create a password using that email address, and voila, I'm Jasmine. So having a robust ID verification process in place is key. And then having the capability to validate that. And that's a very, very good question. So when you go to notarius.com/PO, again, the first thing that's going to happen after you fill out your subscription form is you will be requested or invited for a live video conferencing session, which lasts about 5 to 10 minutes with one of our ID verification agents. We will vet your ID. You need to show valid pieces of government issued IDs. We keep those recording encrypted just in case. So to Harp's point, if it's brought into court, then we're able to show that, yeah, we did have that session with Harp. Here's the session. Here's his a piece of ID. Once that is done, it is sent to PO. They will cross-reference Harp's ID with membership title designation. Harp, I think you're a lawyer, not an engineer, so therefore you wouldn't be able to have a PO, a PNG digital signature even, but we would have made sure that you are who you are. Once you apply a digital signature, since we're a trusted certificate authority, the only software that you need as a relying party, there's 3 free software available for you. One of them is Adobe Reader. So you can go on our website. You just need to do a bit of a configuration to trust Notarius as a root CA because you're trusting our processes. And once you've done that, anything that's been digitally signed with a Notarius issued digital certificate will be authenticated. You'll get a green check mark. You'll be able to see if annotations have been made to the file, and you'll be able to go back to the signed version. So in a lot of workflows, if I'm the municipality, I'm receiving the engineering documents, I want to do some annotations on it. It's tampering, but at least the digital signature keeps tracks of that and allows us to go to the original signed version. So Adobe Reader is one. You can go on our website and download our free Consigno desktop. So in a lot of cases, people don't want to have open one by one each document to validate and see the green check mark. They might want to do that in bulk. If I want to do bulk validation, I can download the Consigno desktop. It's a free software, and I can select 20 drawings, right click, validate signature. And if any drawings in that stack is not properly digitally signed, it's going to get flagged. And the other one is also free. It's a free website. It's called verifio.com. So you can it's pretty simple. You upload your PDF file into that portal. It'll check for the ID for the digital signature validation. And it'll let you know if the document has A, been signed by a Notarius issued credential, and B, if the document has been tampered with. So therefore you're able to raise the flag if there's any concern. So we're having the ID verification process in place. So that's a process. It's not a technology. And then you have free tools as the public to be able to validate those credentials. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much, Charles.
Thank you.
We do have another question. So how have digital signatures helped improve the procurement process in terms of call for tender or project management? Anyone for this one?
I can comment when it comes to procurement and tender process. Obviously, when it comes to tendering, if you look at it from the construction perspective, a municipal project, the most important element of the whole process is enforceability of contracts, right? There's a contract being created between the individuals that are putting out the tender and the parties that are bidding. They don't essentially have, and I won't get into the legal mechanics, but there's a contract A and B theory. And so enforceability is very important. The other elements that are very important are the timing of the submission, right? And there's a lot of document being thrown. It's critical for reviewing the document. So these tender packages that are very lengthy, you want to make sure that the bidders are reviewing all the documents. And so we have timing of submission, we have reviewing of the documents, and then the third one is ensuring they're agreeing and executing all these various documents. And again, just understanding the digital signature, what it does, there's a timestamp of who reviewed it, the identity, the timing of review, and it becomes an enforceable contract. So from that perspective, I can see that being helpful to the process.
Maybe if I can step in and add a bit to that. So in Quebec in the early 2000s, so we did have two overpass crash and crumbling, and there was loss of life in those events. And what the Ministry of Transport in Quebec did, and the Ordre des Ingénieurs du Québec did, they did an inquiry, and they found out that it was really the paper management process that was part of the issue there. So the engineers would submit rolls of paper document to the Ministry of Transport as part of the RFP process, right? The first thing that the Ministry of Transport would do is scan those. They would send the paper original to a vault, never to be consulted again. And what they found out in the inquiries that there was different electronic versions used by the different engineering firms for that bridge management. And this, in the end, ended up with having some flaws in the project management and design and how to do the bridge maintenance that led to the accident. So they said, well, wait a second, if we can go digital from the onset, submit digital document, I can vet and validate the data integrity, that these have been submitted by engineers members in good standing, and I can do away with all the scanning and paper management and be sure that everyone's working with a digital original that has the digital signature, to Harp's point, timestamped, vetted, and so on and so forth. So everyone's using that right revision. Are you using the revision of the document that I signed on November 3rd at that time? No, I'm not. Well, I raised a flag. You're probably not looking at the latest revision. So we can track all of that. So that's certainly been helpful from an RFP and procurement process and automation process.
Great. Thank you very much.
And I'll just add quickly.
Oh, sure.
Just a practical example of that. I was reviewing a case out of the States where something similar did happen, where there was a tender out for a project and there was a few contractors that ended up winning the bid. And there was one document that had a very prejudicial, I guess, provision in it. And they all tried to deny that they saw the document and that they agreed to the document. And there, what they had set up wasn't a digital signature per se, but there was it's kind of a similar system they use now. Is an online system where you're the company, you register, you have an ID, you log everything, you execute everything electronically. And what the court did in that case was they actually went back and looked at all the timestamp information of every time they clicked on a document, when they signed a document, whether it was their ID, whether they got the confirmation email, and concluded after all that, yeah, it was enforceable, that agreement. So from a court's perspective, that information becomes very critical in making those decisions if there's a dispute.
Great. Thank you very much. In terms, after all of that being said and what we've heard so far, what are some of the barriers to the adoptions that you've seen, the adoption of digital signatures or digital transformation that you've experienced?
Mainly as insurance is concerned, it's important that anytime you're adopting new workplace practices, such as the use of a digital stamp, or if you're providing a different type of service or making any changes to your practice, it's really important to make sure that you are communicating that to your insurance broker, just to make sure that your insurance portfolio is adapted to those new processes. And within that portfolio, if you are working online and using a digital stamp, it's important that you have a cybersecurity and privacy liability insurance in place. Some other recommendations, as Charles had mentioned, regulations with the PEO or other regulatory bodies can change and evolve over time, just to adapt to the new practices that engineering firms are taking on. So it's important as well to make sure that you are following those practices and that you are aware of those changes at all times.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
So I can add a few comments just on barriers of adoption. Again, I can also look at it from the perspective from the legal industry, which, like the engineering community, has also done a shift during COVID, where people are working more online documents. Courts are now, receiving documents online, and our version of electronic signatures have become more important. And the few things that I find are some of the barriers. I think number one would be cost, right? And I don't know if Charles spoke about this, but I assume there's obviously a cost to any product, right? So the digital signature here would have a cost. And the end user may look at that and perceive that as another yearly expense they're taking on. But I think Charles also put it out in his presentation that you also have to look at it from a cost saving perspective. Even though you may have this now monthly or yearly cost, you're going to have this time, paper, all this other savings that needs to be taken into consideration, which may not inherently be done when an engineer is first looking at this. Second, I think with technology, well, not even with technology, I think with anything, there's always a resistance to change, right? People want to do things the way they're used to doing them. So if you've always used wet ink and there's a security there, then whether you're moving to electronic signatures and seal or the digital signature and seal, it's going to feel like this may take more effort. But again, I think, when you look at it, there could be, especially if you're signing various, a huge amount of documents all the time, there could be a saving there. And then again, people may have legal concerns, which hopefully, from our discussion today, some of those have been hashed out. I think those are some of the main things that people may be thinking about when there's a, barrier.
Perfect. Thank you. And we do have an online question. So what is the typical cost for a sole practitioner to set up a digital signature through Notarius?
So typically speaking, there are two fees when you subscribe. There's one is a subscription fee. It's a one-time, once in a lifetime fee, right? It's to get you set up in the system and vetted and software licenses. And there's an annual recurring fee. So for a self-employed engineer, the subscription fee is $140 and the annual service fee is $185. Which includes the support, training, upgrades, updates. So it's really as a service. So to Harp's point, there is cost to paper. So paper printing, paper handling, paper shipping, paper management. So if you're a self-employed engineer and you're signing off on a couple of reports annually, so let's say you're an environmental engineer, typically speaking, environmental engineers will have low volumes of documents. They submit a few reports annually. Might not make a lot of sense for you to abandon the paper to the digital format. But if you're working as an engineering consultant and you're signing off on a volume of documents, we tend to forget, but a large scale plan drawing printed out on paper is a couple of dollars per page just to print. So if you're signing off on a set of 100 drawings, you've already spent the annual fee of the digital signature. And then if you have to ship those rolls, you need to pay the courier service and so on and so forth. So it's a choice, and you need to find if it makes sense for you as a practitioner to say, there is a benefit for me. It allows me to do my work faster, more efficient. It allows me to manage a digital archive that I have a backup to if ever my systems crash. Rather than a paper vault that if it burns, it's lost. So these are all considerations. Yep.
That's a perfect lead in actually to the next question that just came up. So in terms of going from paper archives to e-documents, what are engineers and engineering companies doing with the paper archives as they adopt the new digital signature way of doing things?
Actually, I can pick up on this one. This is what we've seen, right? If as of today, you're having a small consulting practice and you say, from this day forward, we are fully digital. We will no longer authenticate paper documents. But in my vault, I have those paper archives. What can I do with that? So Electronic Commerce Act typically allows you to digitize those archives. And this is where the digital signature comes in as a pretty neat tool, right? So you can name or designate someone in your staff that would have a trusted digital signature certificate. You need to make sure that you document your scanning process, because you want to make sure that when you're scanning the paper record, the results you're getting on screen is the same. It's the same document, has the same information. The whole document has been scanned, nothing's lost. But then you need to make sure that you're going to digitally sign that new record to make it tamper-proof, and say, I am confirming that this document is a true and complete copy of the paper original that we scanned. And we've seen organizations actually go through that. They've scanned their paper archive. They digitally sign it as saying, this is a certified digital copy of the paper record. And they were able, at the end of it, to be able to basically scrap the paper archive and have it replaced by a fully digital one with the digital signature certificate. I would strongly advise you to seek legal counsel on it before you do this. But the digital signature, again, is an enabler of this transformation and saying, okay, we can go backwards in time and scan our whole archives and move away with the paper vault.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles, for that. Next question that we have, do you see a generational gap between like new graduates and seasoned graduates, like in terms of adoption and in terms of their perspective from an engineering company adopting digital solutions?
I can pick up on this one. We somewhat see it it's a bit particular. The early adopters are the more seasoned professional engineers. But with regards to widespread use, we're taking a look at it. So a third of subscribers are in the group age of 31 to 40 years old. 2/3 are between 31 and 50. But it's pretty well spread around. So we're seeing very young folks. They represent about 6% of our users between the age of 18 and 30. But I don't think there's a lot of 18-year-old engineers out there anyways. And we're still seeing about close to 30% of our users are 51 years and older. So there is somewhat of it's pretty much spread around. And the interesting thing we've seen is the one that initiated the projects were senior management and senior and more seasoned engineers.
Great. Does anybody else have anything to add to this? Your perspectives from the engineering company's point of view? Perfect. So next question, what role does the digital signature play in electronic document management?
I can take this one. So cybercrime is increasing. It's becoming a little bit more sophisticated every day. A lot of companies worldwide in several different industries are adapting stricter loss control measures to protect their business. In the engineering field, it's logical that engineering firms do the same, and a protected digital seal is a way to add that second level of protection.
I can add to it, and that's a very good question, actually. I mentioned in my presentation the digital signature is an enabler, but it's not the end all. So it's important to distinguish between document reliability and document management. These are two separate topics, but they're tied to the same. So I can have a very well-designed document management platform that manages very unreliable documents, therefore documents that I don't know who signed off on it, and the data integrity of those records is not protected. So if I hack into that well-built document management platform, I can start tampering with the files or deleting files and stuff like that. Vice versa, if I can have highly reliable electronic documents. So from the legal point of view is documents that I know who signed off on them, and I can trust that the documents are tamper-proof, but I can mismanage those documents. So really, document management and document reliability, they're two sides to a coin, right? You need to have both.
Great. Would anybody else like to add anything to that question? Perfect. So our next question that we have is going to be a combined question. But what are some of the risks associated with maintaining and storing electronic documentation, which I think plays on what was just said? Client information. How should engineers protect themselves against these additional risks? Anyone want to start with this one?
I can take this one. So again, it just comes back to having the proper loss control measures in place and proper cyber protection with cybersecurity and privacy liability insurance. Insurance companies that we've spoken to who provide cybersecurity insurance have said that in the last year and a half, there has been an increase in cyber incidents, and that's due to COVID and companies having to quickly adapt to a remote working environment. And not always do you have the resources or the time to implement the proper loss control measures to protect yourself in that type of setting. And also, if you are a smaller business, it doesn't mean that you're not a target of cybercrime. So it's important to make sure that regardless of the size of your firm, that you are adequately protected. About 35% of the ransomware attacks that we've seen have come from smaller firms, and the average cost of remediating those have been around 190,000. And then,
Wow.
yeah. As far as protection, yeah, again, it just comes down to having a proper cybersecurity privacy liability insurance in place. They're not all created equal. There's a lot of key components of cyber coverage that are potentially not in a policy. So you want to make sure that it has first and third party protection. So not only protecting a cyber breach that could occur to your client's information, but also protecting your personal data. Coverage for ransomware attack, coverage for business interruption if you're not able to utilize your system if it's compromised.
Well, thank you for that information, Chelsea. Does anybody else want to add to this question?
Go ahead, Harp. Sorry.
Go ahead, Charles. You go ahead first. It's fine.
Thank you. So in my past life, right, I worked for security consulting firms, and we did ethical hacking and cybersecurity audits and stuff like that. And Chelsea's bang on. It doesn't matter which size you are. So the beauty with hacking is I can knock on every door in scale. So there's that. And I've said it to a lot of companies. The best protection you can have against ransomware is a good backup. So being able to restore.
Harp, you wanted to say something as well?
Yeah. So just talking a little bit about cybersecurity, I'll do a quick plug. One of my colleagues, Eugenia, wrote an article in the January issue of this year. I believe it may be called Winter 2021 on cybersecurity, and she outlined kind of obviously how to mitigate the risks. How to protect from cyber attacks, and then mitigate the damages of attacks. So if you can, I believe that Voice magazine is available online, so you can take a look at that. But she incorporated much of what we actually did at our firm in the beginning of the pandemic to protect our information, because obviously as lawyers, all our information is very, very privileged. So, we're extremely, and our law society puts in quite a bit of requirements on how we need to protect our information. But what we did is before that, we used to put all of our information on a central drive, and we switched to a cloud-based. I always thought the cloud-based was riskier for whatever reason, because I figured information went in the cloud, who knows who can access it. But I'm wrong on that. The cloud is the way to go. We also put in, so data is stored on a server that is accessed through a VPN, a virtual private network. So the VPN encrypts the data, making it unreadable to those who steal it. Obviously, the biggest risk for these attacks is when, on how they access the system they get in. So if we have employees using any unsecured networks, they have a two-step verification process before they can even get into their system. Our employee passwords use a multi-factor authentication, and they expire every couple of weeks. So even my password every 2 weeks will expire. And you got to put a new one, and the passwords aren't simple. Like it can't, it has to be numbers, letters, symbols. We have an upgraded firewall, antivirus, and some other neat things are our desktop also is saved to the cloud. So it's not just the system, even our desktop, because we found that a lot of the employees, when they're working on sensitive documents, for whatever reason, just habit, they may still just have them on their desktop and not on the drive. We also have all of the computers in our office, if they ever get misplaced, stolen, or taken, can essentially be shut off. So our IT company has the ability to just completely wipe that computer within minutes of us realizing it's gone. But the number one point that, I was actually talking about this with our IT person, and the number one form of security really is knowledge. So cybersecurity awareness training for employees and advising them, hey, look, these are the type of things, these are the type of emails, this is what's going on, and continually updating and making it an issue and something that they're alive to is one of the best ways, I think, to have the security down. And then obviously what Chelsea says, when there's liability involved, whether it's negligence, whether it's cyber, always make sure you have insurance, right? Because it's one of those expenses that sometimes, obviously if you're an engineer, professional liability insurance is mandated, but when it comes to cyber, it isn't. But it's something in this day and age you can't go without.
Yep. So these are amazing points that Harp and Chelsea brings. Sometimes you might want to look. So cloud service provider is typically, right, they have a reputation to protect. So they themselves take a lot of security measures and put a lot of security measures to make sure that your data that you're making them responsible for is properly protected. You still have some homework to do to see, do they have encryption of the data at rest in place, and so on and so forth. And in some cases, I know that's the case in BC. I'm not sure it is in Ontario, however, but in BC, if you're working with a cloud service provider, there is some data residency requirements. You cannot work with a cloud service provider that the servers or the data would reside outside of Canada. So sometimes you might want to, again, consult legal to make sure that are there any laws or regulation in place that prohibits me from having my data reside anywhere else than in Canada. And that's the case. Well, you need to make sure that your cloud service providers have 100% data residency in Canada, for example.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Charles. So at this point, I'm going to allow all the panelists an opportunity to address any last words or comments you have regarding digital seals and the future of engineering, as well as reminding all of our attendees, if you have any last questions for any of our panelists, to please put that in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Would anybody like to close with any closing remarks for digital signatures, seals, or digital transformation?
So I would say, if COVID-19 has told us anything, is that we're going to be working more electronically, that it is, the more economical, I think, the more safe way of working. And it's also now kind of become more a part of our lives, with more and more people working from home and wanting to work from home. And I think digital signatures for engineers and the electronic seals is a natural progression. And I think the PEO sees that, which is why the PEO has obviously taken the step that they did to partner up with Notarius.
Great. Thank you, Harp. Anyone else have any closing comments?
It was a great closing comment, Harp.
Yeah, I know. It's hard.
Yeah.
Nothing to add.
Perfect. So I want to thank everybody for your questions and comments. I want to thank the panelists too for being with us. Jasmine, I believe you have some closing remarks and some reminders for everybody.
Thank you so much, Virginia, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. A huge shout out to our presenter, Charles Trombley, for starting the session off, and of course our moderator for kind of leading the discussion with Harp and Chelsea from legal and insurance respectively. I'd like to remind everyone that OSPI does offer free webinars for our memberships on a monthly basis. I did input an upcoming one in November and in the chat if you'd like to register for that. I also put a link for a quick survey if you'd like to just give OSPI your feedback on other topics that you'd like to see addressed. I'll also be sending a follow-up email with those two links as well, in case you're not able to access the chat or in case someone has left already. Either way, thank you so much for attending, and thank you to our panelists and presenter and moderator once again. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.